The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we made it. It is time for Four Nations Faceoff. Canada, United States, Sweden, Finland, Four Nations facing off, as the commercial has said over and over and over. How excited are you for the tournament?
I'm pretty pumped. I mean, I'm just literally minutes in the door at my hotel here in Montreal. So boots on the ground in the city. The airport was absolute chaos on Sunday night. So I just wonder if that's, could just be the end of a weekend in any airport anywhere in the world, or maybe that's a sign of, some of the energy and vibe we'll have around this tournament. But got stopped by a few fans at the airport. Everyone's saying, "What's going on with Crosby? What's happening here? Who's coming?" Needless to say, it's been, a long run up to the event. It's been a long time coming. I know it's not best on best. I'm not going to sit here and go through all the things that I don't like about the tournament. What I do like is you have a whole whack of the best NHL players here, pulling on their nation's sweaters. And I think it's going to be much, much better than, say, an All-Star weekend, which is the alternative universe that we might be living right now.
I would very much like to hear your list of things you don't like about this tournament, in contrast to things you might also like about this tournament. There's some new stuff we could try to get to as best as we can, but I'm genuinely curious about how people, not just us, but how people feel about the Four Nations tournament. If people are genuinely excited. I know we've heard people say the ticket prices are one thing, but are people genuinely excited about this tournament? And obviously in your world as an insider, you talk to people around the NHL all the time, and you're around fans too. So I'm very curious to know how you feel, not just about the tournament, but also what you're hearing about how people are approaching this tournament.
Well, I don't remember an event quite like this where, it feels to me like the excitement inside the bubble is much greater than outside the bubble. And what I mean by that is literally any players I've talked to that are coming to this, and we're going to get into the injured guys, but I think this will speak to even their degree of interest is so high. And I just think the average fan, even the average to maybe even we might say super fan of hockey, is not sure what to make of the tournament. Obviously, we've never had specifically a Four Nations face-off. It's invitation only. We could focus on, there's no, the reigning men's world champions, Czechia, aren't here. Switzerland's nowhere to be found. They've been in the last two gold medal finals at the World, so that means no Roman Josi and other players. Obviously, the Russia issue is a separate issue, but some of the best players there's all this stuff we can list, but, and so I don't think fans know what to make of it, but the people that are actually going to contest the games seem damn right fired up about it. And to me, that at least gives you the ingredients. Like, I obviously don't know what's going to happen, but I think it gives you the ingredients where this might pop, where, let's say Wednesday gets it all started with Canada and Sweden, and that game, has some energy to it. Maybe something crazy happens. Maybe it's a physical type of game. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but fans might get drawn into it as it goes along. Like, that's kind of what I feel is going to happen. I mean, the other side of it too, Julian, like we've just seen two games played on Sunday. We're recording this Sunday night just before Super Bowl. So we don't know what happened there, but, there's no games now until February 22nd on the NHL schedule. So nothing is going to happen with your favorite NHL team. I don't think we're going to get a whack of trades or anything or other sort of roster movement that's going to draw your attention away. And so we do have this 13-day window in which, there's going to be 7 games played at the Four Nations face-off. And so maybe starting, I can't say that there's like this massive fervor for things, but I'm guessing by the end, depends what happens in these games, that there's at least a set of circumstances where people are drawn into it that weren't even expecting to care or have a feeling any sort of way. The tickets are one thing. I was looking online. It looks to me like the Canada-US game next Saturday, the 15th of February, is basically sold out. Like, there's tickets available, but they all seem to me to be people reselling them on the Ticketmaster website. There's probably not going to be full sellouts for every game, especially the ones that don't include the host nation, which I don't know how much that matters. Honestly, I'll tell you when I go to the games, I guess, and what the vibe's like, and does it hurt what we see on the ice? But, you got to start somewhere. It's funny. I've done an exercise where I was looking back through all these stories I wrote, and like just years of writing, like the NHL is trying to work towards a 2021 World Cup or a 2019 Ryder Cup or all this stuff. Like, it's been a long journey from that 2016 World Cup, which is the last one that was actually played till now. I will submit to you, and I will fully say, like, I'm not shilling on anyone's behalf here. Like, this is definitely not at the level of the Olympics. Like, I know all the things it isn't, but I still think there's a real window here where this is going to be exciting. I mean, you're still going to see, Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon and potentially Sidney Crosby and Cale Makar on the same power play unit. Like, you're going to see things that we just haven't seen in a long time. And the games, yes, it doesn't carry the circumstances or the weight of something like an Olympics. But I think that there's this one. I think people are sleeping on this a little bit, and I get why. Just because it's been a long time, no one knows what to make of it, and we don't even. I think some fans probably need to see the players care before they care, and so now it's up to the players to put on a show.
You bring up a really great point with the players. I've spoken to players about this too, and my sense is that they do care. Even the ones who are not going to be at the tournament, they'll find a way to watch it while on vacation. But the players who are there, if they do care and it shows in the games and the games are sick, that's what's going to get people to tune in. Canada, USA next weekend. If that is a barn burner, that even if you didn't start watching the game, you will find a way to click on to Sportsnet or whoever's broadcasting in the States. I presume ESPN, I'm not sure, but you'll find
ESPN
a way to watch
TNT.
that game.
They're splitting it, so I don't know who has which games, but it's both networks are carrying the games.
Perfect. So you will find a way to tune into that game, especially, just Canada, USA. Like, it's the rivalry. People in this country, in the States, they will find a way to tune into those games. But the players have to make it count. That's a big thing. I want to be encouraged by the fact that the ones at least I've talked to say that they care, and the ones that you say you've talked to say that they care as well. And hopefully that comes through with that. That's one side of it for me.
Yeah, well, another thing, too, is, look, this is a mid-season tournament. So the downsides of that, of course, is what have we spent the last week focusing on? All the players who are injured who may or may not be able to get there because they're playing games that matter in the regular season. The flip side of that is, everybody's in game shape that is going to play. Like, everybody is in the rhythm of the season now. Like, I think we're going to see pretty high level of play in this tournament. And, the downside of a September tournament is players are coming out of the summer. Obviously players in this day and age are all in shape, but I still think there's a level of game shape that even they can't replicate with the crazy disciplined summers that the large majority of them live and have. And so, I think that those games tend to be a little more rusty. Now, of course, some of these teams and players and lines and defensive pairings, like it's not going to be guys that are used to each other. There might be some feeling out in the Wednesday game and the Thursday game, which is the first game for each of the four teams. But I still think, I just think that this could be a little bit, basically it feels to me, Julian, and I don't know if I'm reading the room wrong here. It feels like there's not a lot of expectation among fans. Like, broadly speaking, I don't get there's like a ton of hype about this tournament. I don't know. It's hard to gauge excitement level, right? But I'm just judging by online, by some of the people I talk to and that I have in my life. Like, I don't get the sense everyone is like out of their minds for this. I just feel like when it starts, it's going to change quickly. Like, and look, I'll eat my words. We're going to do a couple pods during the course of this event. I'll have plenty of time to be like, do you know what? I was wrong. And I will gladly, I'm always willing to say that, but I don't know. I just got a feeling this is going to, because I think that the bar is sort of low for what people expect. I think it's going to exceed that bar. Now, how good it is, does it stand the test of time? Will we be talking about it in 10 years? Probably not. I mean, maybe if the U.S. wins, if the U.S. wins and it starts this era that a lot of people have been waiting for and predicting and thinking, this could be, we might not look at it as historically significant, but it's sort of like, yeah, the tide's really started to turn there because, let's remember where we last left off here. Canada won everything for a long period of time. Like 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, the 2014 Sochi Olympics, the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, with a lot of the same players, most of which now have aged out and are into retirement or on to other things or working in the media or, running wineries somewhere, whatever you do post-career. But that group of Canadian players won a lot. And Canada had a stranglehold on these type of events. And especially if you look at 2014 Sochi and 2016 World Cup, like Canada didn't lose a game in those tournaments. And, it almost sort of perfected something that I know some people didn't like that 2014 team won clinically, but it was winning some games, 2-0 and 2-1 and, but like sort of sucking even the unpredictability out of the game. But either way you cut it, at the end of the day, historically dominant stretch for Canada. There's no reason to expect that to continue now. I mean, other than there's many great, talented hockey players, I don't think you'll see any country necessarily have that kind of stretch unless maybe the U.S. seizes it now. So anyway, I'm rambling in all directions. I don't know what's going to happen yet.
Please.
That's part of the excitement of being here, I think, is just, and you could get a surprise. Like, I think the Swedish team is better than a lot of Swedish teams have been. And does it maybe on paper stack up to the Canadian and U.S. team? No, probably not. But you don't have to bend the circumstances to see them winning the tournament. Put it that way. Finland's going to be in tough. They're down 3 defensemen for a country that has 11 defensemen that have played in the NHL this year. So it was a pretty narrow pool to begin with. They've lost 3 of them now, including, Miro Heiskanen. Of course, that isn't fresh news, but, losing player of that ilk, it's going to be hard to overcome. But I mean, if there's any country that embodies, the we before me, that tends to be greater than the sum of its individual parts, it's Finland in international hockey. So I think it's going to be compelling. I think it's going to be, as I say, much better than an all-star game. And, I think it's ultimately was worth doing because we needed to do something. We need some international hockey on the men's side, and finally it returns.
Maybe it's really early to tell, but if this event ends up being successful, is this an event you could see happening with some regularity, the Four Nations?
No. I think this is totally a product of its moment in time. And what is that moment in time? It's all the things I mentioned, that it's been, almost 9 years since we've seen any sort of NHL sanctioned. I'm trying to think of what, in my writing, I've been calling this a top tier international tournament because you can't call it best on best. But anyway, so it's been a long time since we've seen anything even of its kind. Obviously, we live in the time when there's still, the invasion of Ukraine going on by Russia. And so Russia is just not part of international hockey right now. I think just the narrow window to organize the event, like ultimately the NHL has shown you its cards here. It's been forever as I've tried to get a World Cup going. Like, I think they look at, obviously, soccer's World Cup would be the gold standard. There's all sorts of reasons why, starting with history, but also just the fact of how many nations around the world love soccer, love football, value. Like, there's so many nations where that is the sport in a country. Whereas in hockey, there's really only 2 or 3 where you even have the debate where hockey is the number one sport. But even still, why not? Why can't there be a hockey World Cup that's every 4 years that people care about, that there's, say, a play-in, games for some of the smaller countries? Like, that's where hockey needs to go. The NHL has recognized it for a long time for all kinds of reasons. It hasn't been able, even though you see the problem or you see what you need to do, you can't always do what you need to do. And so they haven't been able to get it done. But I think this is totally a one-off moment of time, kickstart, international hockey going again. And I don't think we see any. I think this is a completely, like, you never see this again. So I don't know what the trophy looks like. I do know there's an MVP. I have confirmed there will be an MVP of the Four Nations Faceoff. That had been in some level of question. But this is it's sort of an exhibition, but I think the hockey is going to be better than an exhibition.
Here's my thinking. If this is just going to be a one-off, it would be cool if we ever have to do this again in some way. It would be cool. You mentioned the Ryder Cup as an example. I would have loved it if it was like North America versus world. Because one thing I've heard from talking to friends about this.
Well, you might get that. Sorry, but that's very different than the Four Nations Face-Off, right?
Absolutely, it is.
Oh, that's been discussed in the past. Like, and in fact, at that time, the debate was, would you do Canada versus everybody else? Now, that's going back almost 10 years when that was being discussed. Maybe Canada is not in the position of strength now where that's even the conversation. But I look at that was, I think, John Collins. I don't know if you remember John. He was a senior NHL executive for years. He left the NHL, went into some other business. He's actually back now. He has some small ownership stake, I believe, in the New York Islanders. But I think it might have been his brainchild. So I don't know if it left with John. John was also a big driver in the early days of the Winter Classic. And so some things that have sort of persisted around the NHL. But, you know, I would say it's possible we see other types of international hockey. I think here's the thing. The NHL's figured out how to monetize this. Like every other sport, like see how many NFL games, I think, is it 8 next year? Maybe they're going to be internationally, something of that nature. You know, obviously we have the global series games, the NHL. It's like, I think every sport is looking to become more international. And the best of sport is, I mean, the Olympics for me is that thing, but it's when you have true international competition. And so I think the NHL is going to keep moving in this direction. But I don't see put it this way, I almost don't want to imagine a world where Four Nations Faceoff makes sense in the future, because that probably means like it's not a good global environment, that the league and the IIHF and the IOC can't get along. Like if you're only having 4 countries in a tournament in a select invitational again, it's a sign that we haven't moved forward. And so I'm just hoping this is the first baby step towards moving back to where hockey should be with international play.
For those who have not seen already, CJ put together basically an FAQ on the Four Nations and what NHL teams are able to do, which you can read at The Athletic. And I can hear people in my ear asking, well, even though you're not expected to see any trade activity, like, are teams still allowed to do that? Can we get that out the way? Are teams technically still allowed to make moves? And what else could we see teams do in that 2-week period?
Yeah, 100%. There's no sort of roster freeze of any sort for NHL teams right now. They can make trades. They can put players on waivers. They can assign players to the American Hockey League, either that don't need waivers or if you go through waivers. The one thing is that players themselves, if they start to do that next week, the players that are already on vacation, they don't actually have to report to the HL. So those might just be what we call a paper move to get some cap benefit. But there's no actual restrictions or freeze on what the teams can do. So there's no reason to say that someone who's vacationing in Mexico next week might not get traded, or that one of the players, suiting up for Finland or Sweden or Canada or the US during the Four Nations Faceoff couldn't theoretically be traded. I think it's unlikely for a couple of reasons, though. The cap will still be basically counted every day. And, usually when we're talking about teams that are acquiring players, Julian, usually what's the first thing we say? Like, was their salary retained? Did they use a third-party broker to get the deal done? I mean, most teams that are buying don't have a ton of cap space. So why would you go out and trade for a player on, just say, for argument's sake, February 12th, when you don't play for 10 more days and you'd have to account for that player on your roster? Similarly speaking, you'd also have to pay the player during that time. And I just feel like there's a little less urgency to get a deal done. Now, we haven't had a planned break in this NHL season since the Sochi Olympics in 2014. Now, obviously, 2020, we all know what happened. 2021, those years are chaos. There was lots of breaks, but we'll call those unplanned COVID breaks. But this is the first planned break in a long, long time, 11 years. And so I can't say 100% there won't be trades. I just think the conditions aren't there that suggest it's likely. But, who knows? Maybe there's a few GMs that aren't involved in the Four Nations that got lots of time on their hands that start calling around and, getting frisky to make a decision. And then they start making trades. I mean, again, because there's nothing in the rules that precludes it or prevents it. So it's a long way of saying, yes, it could be a free for all, but I don't think there's a lot of in it for the teams to do that. I can tell you for sure the NHL doesn't want that to happen. They want the focus and attention to be on this event. But again, they can't block it. If 2 teams call up Central Registry, they can do their deal now. But, I think more than likely, if you want the flip side of this, if it plays out how I think it's going to play out, we get back to the NHL season on February 22nd. You've got less than 2 weeks till March 7th. Like, I think that 13, 14 days after the Four Nations Faceoff ends might just be total chaos, because then all of a sudden everyone does have to make moves. Like, it's like, yeah, we just chilled for 13 days. Maybe some people got away. Other people came here to Montreal, ate the chien shows in the press box and watched the games. But the point is, everyone watches this Four Nations play out, and then there's going to be a lot of activity. I mean, this is, it's like the snow outside here. We're walking on sort of untouched sidewalks here. I mean, it's hard to know exactly how this is going to go down. But if you want my prediction, what I've heard from people, I think it's unlikely we see much trade activity, but that coming out of that Four Nations break, it's like, you got you shaking up your Coke bottle and you're taking the top off, and it's going to be an explosion.
If you add Mentos to that too, you're just adding a whole other layer of mess to that. And I apologize for the untouched sidewalks. I guess snow removal in my home city has not been too great.
No, nor the one I left today. I had some travel hiccups, which are to be expected in February, but we had a bunch of snow in Toronto too. So I love the winter. I love the fresh snow. So there's fresh snow everywhere.
Okay, let's discuss roster, specifically the players who are maybe on the fence about being at this tournament. Maybe you're likely going to be there. It might be a last minute decision. We started with this player as the big storyline a couple days ago. We might as well go back to Sidney Crosby of the Pittsburgh Penguins. What are we hearing right now as we're recording, as best as we could explain it?
Well, all you need to know is that he's traveling to Montreal. And so, Sidney Crosby's been here enough over the years. He's not here to sample the hot dogs or to go have a Montreal bagel or any other things you might do in the city that is known for. He's here to play for Team Canada. And so unless something unusual happens, unless he has a setback of sort with his injury recovery, which, obviously are within the realm of possibility, I expect we're going to see him pull on the national team sweater at some point during this tournament. Now, all fine and good for me to say that now. The question is he available for Wednesday's game, which is Canada's opener against Sweden? To what degree can he practice on Monday morning? Shortly after recording this, I'm going to watch the Super Bowl. I'm going to go to bed, and pretty early I'm going to head out to Brassard and go watch Canada practice, and obviously be taking note of the lines and watching how that unfolds. Can number 87 participate fully in that skate? How is he shooting the puck? Is he, all those things, because he has been skating, the good news, regularly at the Penguins, even though he missed the last two games before the break. But, he was kind of limited in some of his on-ice activities. And so, all of that is what's to unfold before us. But I can't imagine the captain of the team, someone who's waited as long as anyone, and frankly only has, his sporting life is, unfortunately for all of us who loved watching Crosby play, does not extend out forever. And so, this is obviously an opportunity that's really important to him. And I think that he's going to find a way to play. What does that look like? Is he limited? Who does he play with? Does he sit out a game? All those things are kind of what we're here to watch over the next few days. But, as I say, I'd be very surprised if someone of his stature was traveling here, wasn't doing that with basically the knowledge in the back of his mind that he's going to find a way to get on the ice and play in a game that matters.
Just thinking about the fact that we have Crosby likely for this Four Nations tournament, the 2026 Olympics, and that might be it. Like this may very well, say all you want about how you feel about this Four Nations tournament, but thinking of Sidney Crosby and everything that he's done for Team Canada, I don't know if it's going to hit people as hard as it's hitting me right now. I think we're in the last moments of Sidney Crosby as a Team Canada ice hockey player. And I think we need to process that.
Yeah, that's part of the story, right? It's part of what makes us special. And look, he's the oldest player on a roster at this tournament. So, let's assume and let's hope he can play. He's going to be the oldest player that plays here. That just tells you Father Time is coming. The best thing we can say is Sidney Crosby, while he has, seen some maybe regression in his game, is still a top player, still unquestionably earned his place on this team. He's in his 20th NHL season, and for the 20th time, he's currently a better than a point per game player. He's still performing at a level that suggests to me anyway that I have no doubt that he's a no doubt selection already for next year's Olympics. But you're right, because we don't know. He's only signed through 26, 27. So even if they do have a 2028 World Cup, which is the hope of the NHL, there's a chance he's retired, right? He's not signed that far. Sidney Crosby will turn 40 in August of 2027. So he would have to play at an age we haven't seen many players ever play for Team Canada in best on best to play beyond next year's Olympics. So, I will never, even while watching that tournament, I'm not going to say it's 100% the last time, because if there's anyone that can play into their 40s and still be good enough to be on Team Canada, I'd say he's a pretty good candidate. But we don't know. We don't know if he's going to want to play that long. He's given a lot to the sport. 20 seasons is a lot, right? Wayne Gretzky didn't play 20 NHL seasons. So Sidney Crosby's already beyond the length of time that we saw Wayne Gretzky play. And so I do think it's important. I mean, we should try to cherish every moment we have always. I mean, we don't want to take anything for granted in this life, but especially with, just the way athletics go. I mean, early 30s is kind of old now in the NHL. Like, it's not old, and as I like to say, in reality, it's not old. I mean, I'm way older than early 30s, and I'm still going strong, but you're not going to see your best athletes performing at that level. I mean, even Drew Doughty getting the late invite for Canada, right? Like, he's an old guy at this tournament. Like, it seems crazy to me because it's not so long ago in my memory where he was a young guy that was kind of he turned the Vancouver Olympics on its head for Canada a little bit, started off down the roster and ended up playing big minutes there. Obviously quickly won a Stanley Cup in 2012 after that with the Kings, won again in 2014, was a big part. Like, it feels like, but for him to overcome the injury he overcame, and he kind of overcame the odds a little bit to be at this tournament. And you could see how much it meant to him. I don't know if you saw his interview, but this guy's elated to come here and play this tournament. It's because an athlete's career is so short. And if we're going to go have 9-year gaps between events like this, I mean, well, we should go back. I should have done this. I should have looked at Team Canada's roster from that 2016 World Cup final. But there's some names that are long since gone from the NHL, unfortunately, that played in that tournament. And if you go to 2014 and 2010, I mean, let's face it, most of these people have already moved on to something else. They're building the teams. Ryan Getzlaf's working for Hockey Canada now, right? Like, he used to be on all those teams.
That's true. They're very much in that stage of their careers. We're touching on Drew Doughty. You've telegraphed the fact that he'd be very likely to replace Alex Pietrangelo. I get it's a good move. I understand people who may feel away and say Evan Bouchard should be in that spot, or McKenzie Weegar should be in that spot. I know you've kind of mentioned it before, but can you kind of reiterate why Hockey Canada would trust in Drew Doughty, especially since he just got back after a long injury layoff, over some of those other players?
2 Olympic gold medals, 2 Stanley Cups, a Norris Trophy, World Junior Championship gold medal, 10 years as one of the top skaters in terms of ice time in the NHL, can still defend against top players. Here's the thing. This is a big stage. And again, as much as other people may feel whatever they feel about the tournament, and that's fine. For the players, this is, to play for your country, and especially to play for a country like Team Canada. Like, Canada, I think, had 360 NHL players, right? And there's going to be 23 at this tournament. So, I mean, you're 1 in 10. You beat the odds to make the NHL. You see what I'm saying? Like, to get chosen for this team is something really, truly special. And, when you get in these games, and this is like 4 game 7s, you know what I mean? And so I think it's no more than the fact that his resume, like, you know what you're going to get from Drew Doughty, as much as, and I don't want to even mention any individuals, but the other options, there was definitely going to be a degree of you're not sure. And the reality is, these games, when you get to this, like a game 7, it's won or lost on a mistake. You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like I expect the Super Bowl to be tonight. It seems like the Chiefs win every game on, like, they make the one play, or they stop the one play at the end. Like, the games are so tight, right? Like, Chiefs won almost every game this year by one score, right? That's probably, look, at the first game of this, I don't know what's going to happen, but I bet the final is going to be like a 3-2 kind of game, whichever 2 teams are in it. And so how do you win 3-2 kind of games? Well, you got to score 3, and you got to make sure the other team doesn't score 3. You got to not make mistakes. And so, this is why there's probably such consternation around Canada about the goaltending, because, it doesn't feel as locked down as it's been in the past. But I think part of it has to be the way the team plays in front of it. And so I think this conversation began and ended with Drew Doughty's our guy as long as he can play. And he's played 6 games in the last 2 weeks. He played 2 sets of 3 games and 4-night stretches. And he just played 60 minutes across his last 2 games on Friday and Saturday on back-to-back nights. And so, he's physically shown that he's up to it. I think mentally, Team Canada, feels very confident that he's going to bring the right attitude, the right experience level. I think, this guy is going to carry something in the dressing room too, like that not everybody has. And yeah, he's not wearing an A on his sweater. I don't even know if you saw this. He's wearing 89 on the back of his sweater. Drew Doughty,
89?
Number 8 forever. But Cale Makar, of course, has been on this team since June, has long since claimed number 8. So you're going to see Doughty. He doesn't need a letter. It doesn't even need his normal number 8, but he's still going to carry something in the locker room. And I think they're hoping on the ice that no other players that were at, available as fill-ins could. And so there might be some other players out there, honestly, that certainly are maybe even better individually in an NHL game. But, for good or for ill, I think they're going to go down with Drew Doughty. And I'll tell you this, he's one of only 3 right shot defensemen on this team. I think he's going to play regular shifts. Like, I don't think they brought him here as a number 7. Because there is going to be a forward and a defenseman that's scratched for each of these games, for each of the teams, assuming no injuries. But, as long as everyone's healthy, you're going to have to sit out, well, I guess 3 players because you have a third goalie too. So, but I don't think Drew Doughty was brought here to be scratched. I think he's going to be playing regular minutes. And yeah, so that's my case for it. And look, I understand everyone's counter argument, but it's a compelling argument. It only blows up in your face as if he gets out there. He's not up to the speed. His fitness isn't there. But keep in mind, there's no back-to-backs in this tournament for Canada or for anyone. It's limited travel. Like Montreal to Boston is nothing. I mean, when you're used to playing for the LA Kings and you travel here, there, and everywhere in the NHL season. I think the circumstances of this tournament are set up for older players and for someone like Doughty coming off a long injury.
Okay, I appreciate that explanation. Team USA, as we've already mentioned, we're recording on a Sunday just before the Super Bowl, and unless I've missed something coming under the wire, we don't know if Quinn Hughes is going to play for Team USA at this tournament. How do you feel about that situation? What's your read on that?
Well, it's tough, right? Quinn Hughes missed 4 games for Vancouver, leading into the break, which is different than some of the other players that are coming here. Like Mikko Rantanen missed 1 game for Carolina, for example, on the weekend. He traveled to Montreal. Like it was a very minor type of injury that kept him out of that game, and he's expected to play for Finland. Quinn Hughes being the captain of the Vancouver Canucks, having to sit out 4 straight games before the break, that tells you that guy is really banged up because, he played through, he was dealing with a hand injury. He's had a splint on his hand for, I think, a month or so before this latest injury, which he suffered the night they traded for JT Miller a week ago Friday. Lower body type of injury separate from the hand issue. And so, I don't have enough info here to tell you which way this is going to go. And I don't want to pretend I know. Like, he obviously wants to play. He's got his brother there. He was one of the first 6 named by Team USA. He's on the list of players that have waited a long time to get this opportunity. And he's going to be an important part of Team USA if he can play. But then he's also got to gauge, like, what can he do? And so I just have to stand by and see what's on the ice on Monday morning or see if I can get a tip from someone. But right now, I really don't know if Quinn Hughes is going to be able to play. I would say I think he's a longer shot to do it than, say, Sidney Crosby, for a whole bunch of reasons. As I mentioned, I think the significance of the injury is a little different. But I'm not going to bet against this guy because he's a warrior. We've already seen him play injured this year a bunch for Vancouver. And he's a huge part of this team. He wants to be there for his friends, for his family, for his country. And so it's an unenviable spot he finds himself in, just the timing of that injury.
I know you say a lot on the show, you do not have a crystal ball. I hope the one I sent to your hotel room got there in time, because I'd like to know, if Quinn Hughes is not available for Team USA, who do you see the Americans sending in his place?
I think it's Jake Sanderson. It seems like he had been at least in some way tapped on the shoulder and told to be ready, which, all teams have had to do with potential injury replacements. And as you can attest, covering the Senators as closely as you do and as well as you do, Sanderson's performance has really taken an uptick after maybe a little slower stretch at a certain point of the season. I know he was watched very closely right up until the deadline when they select the team in early December. And he's someone that all along, even when they didn't pick him for the initial wave of this team, was instantly goes to the pile. Like he might still be there next year in Milan. I mean, do you know what's interesting about Team USA is they pushed really hard to get 25 players added to the roster. They wanted to bring an extra forward indeed, and then even what the tournament rules allow. They even thought about doing a sort of training camp in Florida during this break where the extra players could go and like say golf or do whatever, sit on the beach or whatever they want to do, but then also skate just to stay in shape, just in case you need to call someone in last minute. Like they really wanted to have a bigger pool of guys that were sort of quote unquote part of this process. Cause I think they recognize they left lots of good players at home. And so I think Sanderson was always included in the mix of those ones. And so, if they need him, I think he's the one who gets the call in place of Quinn Hughes.
Okay. Team Finland, you mentioned earlier on.
Can you imagine that training camp in Florida, by the way?
Yeah, training camp. Yeah, sure.
Training camp, like you stay in like skating shape because, some guys aren't going to skate, for other NHL teams during this break.
No.
And there's a world if teams run into injuries that you're calling a guy basically off the beach to join your team. It's happened, right? Remember a couple years ago, I think Owen Beck got called into the World Junior team with like the tournament was already going on in Halifax. So it happens, but how sick would that be if like Team USA like paid for you to go on vacation in Florida? You just skate to keep in shape, but then you do whatever else you do. You go to the elbow room or whatever. I mean, that'd be a pretty good gig.
I love we're both thinking the same complex in Florida. I mean, we've seen the videos of how nice they have it for the Florida Panthers. So yeah, I could totally see guys just like hanging out in Miami. You're doing your thing, and you get the phone call, and it's Bill Guerin being like, "Hey, pack your bags. You're coming to Boston, or you're coming to Montreal, wherever they're going to be at that time." That'd be fun. That would be fun. But I also imagine some players not wanting to do that.
It's like being a black ace in the playoffs, except you don't even have to like go anywhere. Like you only have to get called in if they really need you, but otherwise you just get sort of a few days paid vacation to chill with other guys. Like it's not the worst. Wouldn't be the worst gig if anyway. I don't think they ended up doing that, but I just know that was among the ideas discussed because this could be the next thing we're talking about on this pod. Like one team gets two forwards injured, and then who are you bringing in the middle of the tournament? Where's that person been? Because let's face it, the rest of the NHL right now. Like, I haven't been following the flight patterns, but I'm sure it's like Cabo and I don't know where all the hot spots are. But like naturally, it's February. I'm sure the whole league that isn't part of this tournament is getting away pretty quickly. I mean, there's only 23 times 4. You only got 92 players in this tournament from the NHL. Like the other 700 players, they're off right now. So you can imagine what that looks like.
Oh yeah, like the Senators played in Sunrise on Saturday against the Florida Panthers. When that team plane returned to Ottawa, like that was at best half full. A lot of those guys are going to be down south for the next couple of days. Well, one guy in particular who won't be joining them down south is Nicholas Matinpalo, who will be replacing Rasmus Ristolainen on Team Finland. This guy was called up basically to help out with the injuries the Senators were facing with guys like Travis Hamonic out and Jacob Bernard-Docker. And now you have fans in Ottawa who want him playing instead of Travis Hamonic. And now he's playing for Team Finland at the Four Nations. That is a wild, unique story I don't think he was drafted either. This guy's kind of come out of nowhere in their system.
Yeah, he's probably pitching himself on his way to Montreal because you're right. He's not established. He hasn't scored an NHL goal yet, right?
No.
So, I'm just saying he's still very early stages of it, the start of his NHL career. And for anyone who's not familiar, in order to be eligible for this tournament, you had to be playing NHL games this season. So when Finland found out definitively that Rasmus Ristolainen wasn't going, they only had two choices. The other being Billy Heinola, who has not been up with Winnipeg all year. Like he's gone back and forth with the AHL. So they were choosing between two players who aren't what we'll call established full-time NHLers right now. So they give, how do you say the name, Julian? I don't want to butcher anyone's name. Matinpalo?
Matinpalo.
Montempalo.
Montempalo.
Montempalo. But
Montempalo.
Point is they give Montempalo the call. And he might be the seventh defenseman. It doesn't mean we'll see him in a game. Like, who knows? I'm not sure what the coaching staff has planned. But, I mean, Finland, already drawing from the smallest pool of players, to have 3 injuries at one position and have that position be defense. It's kind of, I won't call it a worst-case scenario, but it's pretty damn close to a worst-case scenario. Finland only had 50 players to choose from for this event that have played NHL games this year. And obviously they're bringing 23 and they've had to scratch 3 because of injuries. So, basically if you had a Finnish passport and you played in the NHL this year, you had a 1 in 2 chance of being on this team, just by the numbers. So, I mean, that's how this story happens. But honestly, look, as much as I'm making some light of the situation, maybe this is a moment where this guy plays and maybe he never looks back, right? Like you're already saying the buzz is building around him in Ottawa in terms of what he can do. Like maybe this is a shot in the arm, even if he just comes in as a practice player and gets to spend time around his countrymen and get to be in this environment. I mean, that's the flip side of all this, is that it's on the surface. Yes, it's kind of a crazy set of circumstances that brought him here, but he might find himself in a game and he might find himself on the ice against whatever, Matthews, Hughes, and who's their other line mate again? I think Jack Hughes, Matthews, and forgot.
I mean,
anyway,
Brady could just a bunch of different players could be in that spot.
We haven't seen the practice yet, but I had heard what that line is going to be. Anyway, 3 guys who are like NHL All-Stars / Rocket Richard Trophy winners, and he's got to be out there defending. So, yeah, it must be honestly a little bit surreal as he's coming to Montreal today.
Actually, now that I think about it, for Montenpalo, if Finland versus Sweden, there's a chance he'll be on the ice against his teammate Linus Ullmark. If he goes up against the United States, there's a chance he'll be up against his teammate Brady Tkachuk. Also, something I just learned a couple moments ago, Finland had him on their team during the 2023 World Championship, and he scored a goal and added 2 assists. So not only is this, so he has experience playing for Finland internationally. So, yeah.
And I was going to say, the one thing about Finland that's worth pointing out is it's just because it's a smaller country. A lot of the players do know each other. They have played, especially those that have spent time back home. They play even like there's international events like there's one just happened now that are regularly part of the schedule. And so I think that there is a higher familiarity between players from that nation on the national team scene than maybe you get in some other countries. I mean, it's funny. I spoke with Matthew Tkachuk last week. He was mentioning that about the U.S. is that now having that national team development program in place for so long, he said that so many guys almost quote unquote grew up the same. Like even if you weren't on the same year, but you went to the same schools or maybe you just had similar experiences, like there's a lot of that they can relate to. Whereas, when a Team Canada gets together, like there will be players that are more or less don't know Sidney Crosby. Like everyone knows who Sidney Crosby is, but like, it's a little different environment. Like every Team Canada is truly, there's guys meeting each other in the dressing room basically, or meeting each other at the hotel right now. So anyway, so that can be an advantage too. Maybe it's not, what I'm saying is it's maybe not as foreign environment for someone like Montenpalo as I'm imagining, because he will have been around the national team and obviously the GMs and coaches all are coming back from Finland. So he's going to have a little more familiarity there than just showing up like, hey guys, I guess I'm on this team.
Mm-hmm. Before we get to Ask CJ and a few other notes, do you have a Four Nations prediction? And is there anything else you're hearing before we wrap up Four Nations talk?
No, not hearing too much. It's been a quieter weekend, I'd say. So we'll get back into the trade stuff and all that. That will resume very shortly here. I'm going to predict that Team Canada win. I know it's not exciting, but the more I've thought about it, a team with McKinnon, Makar, McDavid, plus everybody else. I'm just saying, a team with those as like your tentpole players. I just think that no other country is going to match up to that. There's definitely weaknesses that we could guess at, the goaltending and stuff or question marks. But I still think if I had to make a true prediction, what I actually believe is going to happen, no games, no trying to be funny, I think Team Canada is going to win this event.
Okay. I said this a couple months ago. I still feel confident about it now. I think the United States wins this tournament. I like the way they're built out with goaltending. I think just with the firepower they have, especially up front, the fact that Quinn Hughes isn't there, though, that does give me pause. I mean, we don't know yet at this point now. But if Quinn Hughes is not healthy, he's not there. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a little shaky. But I did say the United States a couple months ago. I will remain consistent with that prediction. And if I'm wrong, who cares?
One thing I've heard from some people that are far smarter and more astute to me that in the NHL circles is they think as great as the individuals are on the U.S. blue line, that team might be susceptible to a forecheck and that they might have that might be an area where obviously Canada has brought certain players, which let's face it, it cuts both ways. We might be at the end of this time of Canada not scoring enough and being like, why did they bring so many guys that are bruisers or whatever? Like, this is kind of how these things go. But that might be an area that Canada can exploit. So anyway, just plant that little seed in case you're still listening this deep into our pod and you're going to watch Canada USA in less than a week's time, and something to watch for.
I would hope you're still listening this deep into our podcast, even if you're just playing it on in the background on your TV somewhere. We appreciate you for that. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that. Okay, we move on from Four Nations to your trade board from a couple of days ago. 6.0. Geez, so many different versions. A whole bunch of different names on the list. I'm very intrigued about the number one name on your list. Very early, but what are you hearing right now about New York Islanders forward Brock Nelson?
Well, I don't think the Islanders have given up on extending him. And obviously that's been a bit of a discussion point of late because, the Islanders had a pretty good last few weeks and put themselves back in a playoff position in the conversation, for those playoff spots. So, I don't think that I've got no indication that the Islanders front office is behaving like they're selling Brock Nelson. But everyone out there that's a buyer, that's looking for help down the middle or looking for someone who can maybe play in their top six on the wing, they're looking at Brock Nelson as an obvious player that's likely to be moved. And so, I think right now that what that means is the teams are sort of lining up, waiting for the doors to open to see if they can get in on the auction. But the auctioneer is Lou Lamoriello, who keeps his cards close to his vest. And the fact his team has won a lot of games despite the injuries they've had. So I don't think he's doing the full call around and this is what it takes and doing that work yet. So I guess how I'll put it is this. By trade board 7.0, there's a world that Brock Nelson is not in the number one spot. And that's not because he's been traded in the meantime. It might be because the Islanders start telling people, look, we're not moving this guy. But until the Islanders start saying that, I think he's got to be number one on the list, or until we get reason to believe, say, Braden Shen, who I got number 11 or so, or if Brad Marchand truly becomes available. Brad Marchand, I think I had around 10 on this list. Mm-hmm. Those are guys they're on there because there's kind of like a whiff of smoke in the air, but it's not like they're for sure on the trade block. Once maybe one of those players, if they become truly available or 100%, it looks like their team's focused on moving them, then they might take that number one spot. But until the Islanders say it's not happening, he's got to be right up near the top. And after the JT Miller deal, he's in number one.
Some other names on that list too. Dylan Cousins, we talked about him on our last pod. Rasmus Ristolainen is up there too. You have them in your top five. Do you see those guys as top five options when you do trade board 7.0?
I have to say, what hasn't really truly developed yet is the rental market. There's obviously a few teams like Chicago's got a few players on the list that are rentals, like a Ryan Donato, just to point out one. Though it's funny, I've heard a little bit of rumblings that maybe it's not a foregone 100% conclusion they trade him, that maybe they look to extend him instead. But, point being is we don't fully have the rental market available. So some of those names, obviously Cousins has signed for many more years, a young player. Buffalo certainly had trade discussions involving him and has seen what the market is. I don't want to predict the future of it, not because I'm ducking the question, but just because honestly, we basically do it in the moment and it's a reflection of the moment, a collection of the intel and how I'm feeling things are. But there's no, it's more art than science, as I like to say. And so, I don't know how it's going to look or what I'm going to hear at this tournament. The cool part about this tournament is it's 10 or 12 days being around a lot of hockey people. Maybe there's going to be more scuttlebutt. Stay tuned. That's why we try to keep refreshing the board as much as makes sense. And this year it's made more sense, frankly, to do more versions, I think, than last season because we've had more big trades as this year's gone along. It's been kind of an interesting trade year, and I'm hoping we get we're getting towards the final act here. So I hope it's a compelling final act of NHL transactions before we have the run up to the playoffs.
One last name, and then I promise we'll get off the board. Jake Evans. You have him on 27 on your board.
That might be a bit low,
but it might be a bit low. I think especially after today, Pierre LeBrun. Just reading off of his Twitter here, his understanding is that Evans and the Canadiens have exchanged numbers on what an extension might look like, and they're not close. Obviously, things can change with one phone call, but as of now, it makes it more likely that Evans gets dealt before the March 7th deadline. Also, just as we are talking about the trade board right now, reports are starting to surface officially that Quinn Hughes will not be at Four Nations. So we were able to get that on our show.
Okay.
And CJ's getting the phone out, so he's probably checking for himself. Don't mind the orientation changing for those watching and for those listening who might not know what's going on. But reports are starting to surface. Elliot Friedman, I saw him tweet about this just now. Quinn Hughes not going to be playing for Team USA at the Four Nations Faceoff. If you want to rewind back to the segment where we were talking about him, it looks like where we were potentially discussing potential replacements for him. You can do that. But it looks like right now, Team USA will be without Quinn Hughes. Big loss for them. You know how big of a player he is for Vancouver. Likely would have been a top pairing guy for Team USA at this tournament. And, well, he hasn't played in the last how many games with that lower body injury for Vancouver. Obviously a really tough situation for him, but it is what it is. I'm sure a lot of Vancouver Canucks fans back home would much rather see him healthy. And for Team USA, he will not be available at Four Nations. I kind of handled that like a breaking news report. But that is the news right now. There you go. CJ, again, don't mind him. He's probably sending out the tweet right now and just double check whatever info he needs to. But all right, cool. All right, so we have that down there.
Jake Evans being available isn't a surprise. He's been on the trade board for a while. He's having a career year, right? So It makes sense that he's going to want more in free agency than Montreal's probably willing to pay him. The Canadians have done a good job of selling players at past deadlines. So I've expected him to be moved for quite a long time. I don't think anything's really changed there other than, it's probably working towards that conclusion where Montreal is going to have to make a decision. And, as we mentioned earlier, Quinn Hughes, the writing had been on the wall, unfortunately, that he wasn't going to be able to get here. So that's where we're at, bud. Super Bowl's getting close. Yep. I hope you're really quick on the Ask CJ because I'm losing my focus.
I'm losing my focus too. Just to kind of set the timeline here, the Canucks have officially announced that. So yes, he will not be there.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, let's get to some of these questions here. Thank you to everybody who sent them in, whether over Discord, over Blue Sky, or over Twitter. Congo Red wants to know, what surprised you about your first live podcast?
Yeah, like it's just weird because, it's sort of like planning a party. You don't know who's exactly going to be there. You send out the invites. In this case, I was nervous about the Coburg show. I didn't know how many people, I don't know a lot of people in Coburg anymore. Obviously, a few family and friends were there. But I would say this, that I was surprised how many other people came to Coburg, traveled distance to be there. And sorry for my distraction. I just had to tweet while doing this show.
By the way, for those who were wondering why CJ had to take his phone a second time, Jake Sanderson is going to replace Quinn Hughes at the Four Nations.
Yes. So there we go.
Yes.
But yeah, and I don't mean to, Red Congo, I don't mean to dodge your question. The weirdest part of it is just like the room. Like, even when you envision it, even when Steve and Adam and the crew tell us like, okay, we sold out all the seats, you don't know what it's going to look like and what it feel like. And then you get on stage and you look out and it's like, wow, this is kind of wild that you can just like, hey, say we're doing a show. And then all of a sudden that happens. So thankful for everyone who came to Coburg and obviously the live show during All-Star last year.
Bailey wants to know what would it take to get you to end your running streak? Charity, a lost bet. Also, what's the streak at now?
It's funny. I looked. It's at roughly 1,750 days, give or take, one or two. I looked at that recently. It's going to be probably an injury or something that like truly keeps me from being able to go out the door and go. Is what's going to keep it from happening. Charity, I guess if the person say, like you said, would you pay CJ $1 million not to run and he can donate that money to charity? Okay. Then I'd have a decision. I hadn't even pondered that as a possibility. But I mean, the truth is I keep intending to do it. It's been a very wintry winter where I am. There's been a lot of cold temperatures and a lot of snow. Like some winters are not as much as this one. And I've been loving being outside. did a half marathon 2 weeks ago. I'm not slowing down. I guess actually I am probably slowing down. Truthfully, I haven't looked at the watch, but I'm getting older. I'm maybe not as fast as I once was, but I'm certainly enjoying it. And day 2000 is scheduled for somewhere in October. I don't know the exact day off the top of my head. So hopefully by next October, we're talking about celebrating my 2000th day in a row, because that's the big one now in my mind that I'd like to get to.
Looking forward to the new nickname CJ2K. I'll give you one more so we can get to Super Bowl. Adam Kerr wants to know, since it's been rumored that the Detroit Red Wings might trade Vladimir Tarasenko, are they buyers at the deadline? If so, what are they looking to add?
I think that they'll be cautious buyers. Like, I don't see them going all out. It's simple to say, but I think they'll just be looking for upgrades there. I don't have a sense of exact wish list. Obviously a team like that, so much has gone right. Like, they've won a lot of games since the end of December. Just because they traded a veteran player in a specific circumstance, like Tarasenko potentially, I don't think that's certainly not a sign that they're selling. But I think they as much as I can imagine, if you're a fan of that organization, you want to hear they're all in to make the playoffs. Like, I think they're still looking at the big picture, and so it's got to make sense. I don't see them swinging for the fences on the costliest rentals, but obviously anything that can improve, the chances of them not just to make the playoffs this year, but over the next number of seasons. I mean, they're trying to build something sustainable in Detroit. And so I don't see them being like a headline grabbing buyer, but Steve Yzerman, he's pulled off trades that surprised us in the past. Remember that Anthony Mantha deal kind of came out of nowhere at the time, is the one that jumps to mind. But, look for them potentially to make a kind of trade that none of us are talking about. Because I think that's more their brand than getting in on, say, one of the main rentals and giving up a second or first round pick for that player.
All right, Siege, great work today. Let's get to some Super Bowl action. Of course, recording on a Sunday night and all that. Thanks so much for everyone who tapped in for today's episode. The breaking news coming in. You love to see it on this podcast.
Sorry I got
whatever
distracted
happens.
there.
Nah, don't apologize. That's a regularity. We're the opposite of the SDP, where they miss stuff. We handle it in real time. That's what we do. We don't miss this stuff.
I know, but it can't be good audio if you're just like, CJ just sounds totally distracted for this 30 seconds to 1 minute. But yeah,
it's a lot better than just silence. In any case, great work. Looking forward to more content from you during the Four Nations. Subscribe to the podcast, and we'll be back later this week with Stick Taps and more in the hockey world. Thanks for watching and or listening to the Chris Johnston Show.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.